Hey guys, what's going on? This is Richie coming at you again with another online Bible study video. Today our video is over John 2, 1 through verse 22. This is Jesus at the wedding in Cana and also him clearing the temple for the first time. So if you got your Bibles, go ahead and get it. It's John 2, and then we'll go ahead and read that together, all right? So on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana in Galilee. The mother of Jesus was there. Jesus was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said, "They have no wine." Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not come yet." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill these jars with waters," and they filled them to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw up some and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now became wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom and said, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifest his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers were sitting there. He made a whip of cords, and he drove them out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins in the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told those who sold the pigeons, "Take these things away, and do not make my Father's house a house of trade." His disciples remembered it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." So the Jews said to him, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" Jesus answered, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it in just 3 days?" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. Then therefore he was raised from the dead. His disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken. Okay, so let's break that down. It's a pretty good-sized passage with 22 verses. So we'll start out with talking about the wedding at Cana. Okay, so here's the setting. Jesus gets invited to a wedding. He invites his disciples. They're invited as well. His mom's invited. Cana in Galilee is a pretty small town, so probably the entire town was there. Probably people from other towns too. So it's pretty small type of place, more of a village than a city or town like we would think of it. Probably just a few hundred people living right there, close to each other. So this is probably a wedding, more than likely somebody he was related to. So the whole town's there. Everybody's there. His disciples, his mother, his family, his brothers were all there. And then they come and say, "Hey, we're out of wine." So then his mom says, "All right, Jesus, I've seen what you can do. It's time for you to do something here." Obviously we don't know. We don't have any stories of Jesus growing up other than when he was a young child. Mary and Joseph and the family, they travel to Jerusalem, and he stays in the temple listening to the teaching after the caravan leaves, and they come back and get him. It's really the only story we have from when Jesus was a young man. We don't know if he showed his power when he was growing up. I've got 2 boys, and if they had power, they would show it. They would use it. I know that. But then when you see Mary say to Jesus, "Hey, they have no wine," this almost seems like she's saying, "Okay, I've seen you do things like this. It's time for you to help them out." Or it's either that, or she knows he's the Son of God, because obviously before he was born, the angel came to her and told her what was going on, told her that hey, this is going to be the Son of God who is inside of you. He's going to be the Messiah. So it's either way, we can argue about it, talk about it, think about it, but either way, it's Mary who says, "Hey, they're out of wine." Jesus says, "Hey, my time hasn't come yet. It's not time for me to go and do this." And it doesn't say this, but I'm sure she gave him a look like, "I'm your mother. Do what I told you to do." So, of course, he goes out and he helps. Obviously, it would be a real short story if he just said, "No, I'm not helping him." Probably wouldn't have made the cut. Probably wouldn't have made it in the Bible. John wouldn't have written about it for sure. So then, in pure Jesus fashion, he gives them this, these crazy instructions. He tells them to go and fill up the water jugs that are used for ceremonial cleaning. In the scripture, it says for rites of purification. Basically, in the Levitical laws for Jews, if when they were unclean, they had to wash themselves, and then in the morning they would become clean, ceremonially clean. If they went out and hunted and they handled a dead animal, they were unclean until they washed themselves, and then until morning, and then in the morning they would be clean again. There were several, many different things that would make them unclean. If they just walked into a Gentile's house, they would become unclean for the rest of the day. And the only way they could become clean again is to wash themselves, to purify themselves in the water, and then go on. And then the next morning they would become ceremonially clean again. This is kind of where the baptism rite comes from, because for them to become clean, they did it one of two ways. They would either go and be completely submerged in the water to completely wash all of the uncleanliness off of them, or they would have just a pitcher, and they would dump water on their bodies using a cup. So that's kind of where that came from. So these are these pitchers. These are these big pitchers. 20 to 30 gallon pitchers. So these are pretty large size things. And he says there's 6 stone water things, 180 gallons worth of water. And Jesus tells them to fill them up to the brim, draw it out, and take it to the master. So he takes it to the house, and he tastes it, and he takes it to the leader of the house, and he tastes it, and it's the best wine he's ever had. He tells the bridegroom, "Hey, why'd you save this to last? This is the best stuff." So then John says, this is the first of his signs that Jesus did. So this is the first miracle, probably chronologically, since Jesus said that his time had not yet come. So this was the first miracle that Jesus did on earth. And his disciples saw it, and his disciples believed in him. His glory was manifested through that. So after that, he went down to Capernaum with his mothers and his brother. So they traveled. So they stayed there a few days. So then that's the end of that story. This passage that we read, this is obviously 2 separate stories, not happening back to back. The end of that part says they stayed there a few days. So then the Passover comes, and so during the Passover, the Jews would head to Jerusalem, and that's where they would celebrate the Passover festival, have the Passover meal. When you look at the last week of Jesus' life, when you look at the Passion Week, and you see Jesus and his disciples having the final, the Last Supper in the upper room, that was they were in Jerusalem for Passover, because Jesus was killed right there before Passover. So Jesus comes into the temple. You see Jesus go into the temple a lot. And even after Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension, you see the Apostle Paul going to the temple a lot. This is where they would congregate. So they would go in there, and Jesus walks in, and there's people just selling, sheep and ox and pigeons and all sorts of stuff, and money changers. And this makes Jesus very upset, because in his mind, this is his Father's house. This is a holy place. So he makes a whip, and he runs them all out, gets all of the animals out, flips over the table, gets rid of all the money changers, and he tells them, "Do not make my Father's house a house for trade." Now, so you think, okay, yeah, he's he doesn't want them selling stuff inside the temple, okay, and that is true, and that is a part of it. But another part of that is these people were making a profit off of the fact that Jews had to come and sacrifice. So the whole reason that people that these money changers were making money was because they were my screen went black. The whole reason these people were making money is because when people would come to the temple, especially through Passover week, people would come from a long way to come there. Well, they would leave their stuff at home, and they would come and buy a sheep, or buy an oxen, buy a pigeon, and they would sacrifice it there to God as a part of the Passover, thankful for the Passover, forgiveness of sins, all that kind of stuff. The whole reason they sacrifice. So what they would do is they would come and they would purchase that there, and these people were charging a big premium to do that. If there were travelers in there, that there were Gentiles that needed to come in, they would come in and buy that stuff at a very elevated very elevated price. When God and Moses first came out with these Levitical laws during the time in the wilderness, the the people of Israel, the Jewish people, the Jewish race, they were nomadic people. They all had animals. They were all there together. They were a smaller group of people, obviously. But and then now that fast forward, 400 to 800 years, here they are in the first century, and they're a very large amount of people that are all coming into this place. So they are. Not all of them have animals. They're not all farmers. They're not all nomads. Some of them are city dwellers by now, living in Jerusalem. Living in the towns around. That's a big part of why Jesus cleared this temple out, was because these people were crooked type people taking advantage of people who didn't have their own animals, and they were making a profit off of the sacrifice and off of the command to sacrifice to God. So that's a big thing. Now, if you read into the Bible, obviously John is the fourth gospel, and we talked about it in the very first video that the Gospel of John is very different from the other three gospels. If you read Matthew chapter 21 through 12, you'll see a story of Jesus clearing out the temple. Now, if you read, starting with 21 through the rest of Matthew, you'll see that's kind of a continuative narrative from Jesus coming into Jerusalem until the death and resurrection and ascension. So Jesus comes into Jerusalem. This is where he's riding on the donkey. They're throwing palm leaves down there, shouting, Hosanna, Hosanna. So this is the triumphal entry to the death. It's about a week. It's right at a week from the death and resurrection of Jesus. So from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday is a week. So everything that 1 week, if you read Matthew 21 through the end of the chapter 28, that's a whole narrative of that week straight through. But you see right after the triumphal entry, you see Jesus going into the temple, and he clears out the temple. Now, some people will say, well, wait a minute, this must be an error in John because Jesus cleared out the temple. This is at the very, very, very beginning of his ministry. And then at the very, very end of his ministry, he clears it out. Well, actually, it's two different events. If you read it, they are not identical. Obviously, a lot of the details are identical. But that's just because people kept going back to the same thing they were doing. When he would go back to Jerusalem, the money changers would move back in. They maybe stayed out for a few days after he, drove them out from the story in John 2. But I'm sure they came right back in. And if you notice that the first time he comes, right after the wedding in Cana, that is the time of Passover. And then when he comes in after the triumphal entry, that is the week right before Passover. So there's this big influx of people in the capital of Jerusalem. So, those money changers are there to make a big profit off of that. This was their big week. So you see Jesus coming again and run them out of the temple. So another big thing that Jesus talks about in John chapter 2 in this passage, they ask him, they say, what sign do you show us for doing these things? And Jesus answers them. He says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. So they're like, whoa, wait a minute. Now this is probably one of their first encounters with Jesus. This is right at the very, very beginning of his ministry. So they're probably not used to, almost the cryptic talk of Jesus, hey, tear this down, I'll raise it up in 3 days, because there's no way you can rebuild this temple. If you look at pictures, if you go online and look at the pictures of what the temple looked like at that time, it was this massive, massive place. Huge, football fields, wide and long, and just massive, massive place. So to build this up in 3 days obviously is impossible. They say it took 46 years to build this place, and you're going to do it in 3 days. And if it goes on to describe, to say that Jesus is talking about his body, he's calling himself the temple. He's calling himself. Now, this is huge. This is a very big thing. We talked a couple times ago about Jesus being a part of God. When the Jews would go to the temple, they would go to the temple to make themselves right with God. They would go to the temple to come into the presence of God. The way they would make themselves right with God was through sacrifice, through the blood of an animal, through the blood of a lamb, through the blood of an oxen. That blood is what would wash away their sins. That blood, there is no forgiveness. There's no redemption of sin without blood. So Jesus comes and he says, I'm the temple. I'm going to be that blood that will justify humankind, all mankind, to God. I am the one that they have to come to get to the Father. You know, if you read on down through and you get to John 14, he says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. So when Jesus comes and he says, I am the temple, I'm the temple. You're going to tear me down, and in 3 days I'm going to be back up. I am the temple. He is saying, it's a beautiful metaphor for him saying that people have to come to me to get to God. And all of Christianity comes down to that one point, where he says, I am the temple, destroy this temple, and I'll be back in 3 days. And obviously he is foreshadowing the resurrection. That's obvious. It's obvious from there. But a not so obvious one is that he is the temple, that people have to come to him to get to God, and they have to come to him for the forgiveness of the sin. And without him, there is no way they can be forgiven. So, there's a lot going on there. Jesus goes to the wedding with his mom and his disciples and his family. Even though it's not yet his time, he does obey his mom and help them out. And he turns the water into the wine. All they had to do was obey him, and the miracle was there. And then Jesus comes into the temple and he clears it out, gets rid of all the money changers and all the animals, and gets them out of the temple, stopping their profits. And then later on he says, I'm a temple. You come to me, you can get to God. So that is a lot of big stuff going on there. So next week, I always say next week. Every time it's next week, but next video, how about that? Next video, we'll do John 2:23, and then we'll run that into chapter 3 all the way down to 3 verse 21. So another big passage there, and a lot to unpack there, but we'll get to it. So anyway, enjoy. If you have any questions, if you ever, we go through these studies. If you ever have any questions, any comments, anything you want to, talk about, if you disagree with something, I don't know, whatever you want, feel free to get in contact with me at any time. You can find all the contact information on bordencc.org. So it's all there. So feel free to give me a call, shoot me a text, shoot me an email, whatever you want to do. So anyway, until next time, God bless, and we'll see y'all soon. Thanks.